Elena Martinez had nothing left to lose. At 19, she had already buried her grandmother, lost their cramped apartment to unpaid rent, and spent 3 nights sleeping in the doorway of an abandoned bakery. Her stomach hadn't seen a proper meal in 4 days, and her worn-out sneakers had holes that let in every puddle she stepped through. The rain that October evening felt like tiny needles against her skin as she wandered through the wealthy district of Blackwood Heights. She wasn't looking for charity or handouts. Aylin had too much pride for that, even in her desperate state. She was looking for work, any kind of work that might give her enough money for a meal and maybe a night in a cheap motel. That's when she saw it. The mansion stood like a dark fortress against the stormy sky, its Gothic towers piercing the clouds. Most people in town whispered about the place, calling it cursed or haunted. They said strange things happened there, that lights moved through the windows at odd hours, and that the owner never showed himself during daylight. Elena had heard the stories, but she didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. She believed in survival. The wrought iron gate stood slightly ajar, which seemed unusual for such a secretive place. Elena approached cautiously, her wet hair plastered to her face. A small sign near the entrance read, "Groundskeeper position available, inquire within." It was exactly what she needed. She pushed through the gates and walked up the winding stone path. The mansion's windows glowed with warm yellow light, making it look almost welcoming despite its imposing size. Ancient oak trees lined the driveway, their branches creating a natural canopy that provided some shelter from the rain. Elena climbed the marble steps to the massive front door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the brass knocker, not from fear, but from exhaustion and hunger. She lifted the heavy piece and let it fall 3 times against the dark wood. The sound echoed through what seemed like vast, empty spaces beyond the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Elena heard footsteps, slow and measured, approaching from the other side. The door opened with surprising quietness for something so large and old. The man who answered was not what Elena had expected. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with sharp, aristocratic features and pale skin that seemed to glow in the lamplight. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he wore an expensive black suit that probably cost more than Elena had ever owned in her entire life. Most striking were his eyes, a deep amber color that seemed to catch and hold the light in an almost hypnotic way. "Yes?" His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of an accent Elena couldn't place. "I saw the sign about the groundskeeper position," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I'm looking for work." The man studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes taking in her bedraggled appearance, her soaked clothes, and the desperation she was trying so hard to hide. "You're out rather late to be seeking employment," he observed. "I don't have anywhere else to be," Elena answered honestly. Sometimes the truth was the only weapon a person had left. Something flickered across the man's face, surprise perhaps, or recognition of her raw honesty. "I see. And you're not concerned about the reputation of this place?" Elena lifted her chin defiantly. "I don't believe in ghost stories, sir. I believe in hard work and fair wages." A small smile played at the corners of the man's mouth. How refreshingly practical. "I am Adrian Castellanos, the owner of this estate. Please come in from the rain." Elena hesitated for just a moment. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, that there was something not quite right about Adrian Castellanos and his mansion, but the alternative was another night in a doorway, another day without food, another step closer to complete destitution. She stepped across the threshold. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than its exterior. The foyer alone was larger than any apartment Elena had ever lived in. A crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting rainbow patterns on the marble floor. Oil paintings in heavy gold frames lined the walls depicting stern-faced men and women in clothing from bygone eras. "This way," Adrian said, leading her down a hallway lined with more artwork. Elena tried not to gawk at the obvious wealth surrounding her, but it was difficult. She had never seen such luxury in person. They entered a study that could have belonged in a museum. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes covered 3 walls. A fireplace large enough to stand in dominated the fourth wall, with a warm fire crackling behind an ornate iron screen. 2 leather chairs sat before the fire, and Adrian gestured for Elena to take one. "You're soaking wet," he observed. "Would you like some dry clothes?" "I'm sure I can find something suitable." Elena shook her head. "I'm fine." "Thank you." Adrian nodded and moved to a sideboard where several decanters filled with various liquids sat on a silver tray. "Something warm to drink, then? Tea? Coffee?" Elena's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Adrian pretended not to notice. "When did you last eat?" he asked gently. Elena considered lying, but decided against it. "Thursday," she admitted. It was now Sunday evening. Adrian's expression darkened, though Elena couldn't tell if he was angry at her situation or something else entirely. "We'll address that immediately." He moved to pull a cord near the fireplace, and somewhere in the house a bell chimed. Within moments, an elderly man appeared in the doorway. He was short and round, with kind eyes and completely white hair. "Yes, Master Adrian? Thomas, please prepare a meal for our guest. Something substantial, but easy on the stomach." "Of course, sir." "Right away?" Thomas glanced at Elena with sympathy and hurried off. "Now then," Adrian said, settling into the chair across from Elena. "Tell me about yourself. What brings you to my door on such a terrible night?" Elena found herself telling him everything. Maybe it was the warmth of the fire, or the relief of being indoors, or simply the fact that Adrian listened without judgment. She told him about growing up with her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. She told him about working 2 jobs while finishing high school to help with expenses. She told him about her grandmother's illness and the medical bills that had drained their small savings. She told him about the eviction and the desperate search for work that had led her to his door. Adrian listened without interruption, his golden eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You have no other family?" he asked finally. "No one." Elena had learned to say it without flinching, though the word still hurt. Thomas appeared with a tray laden with soup, fresh bread, fruit, and cheese. Elena tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but her hunger won out. Adrian watched her eat with an expression she couldn't interpret. "The groundskeeper position," Elena said between bites. "What would it involve?" "General maintenance of the gardens and grounds. Some of the outbuildings need repair. The hedge maze requires constant attention. It's not easy work, but it pays well." "How well?" Elena asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. "Room and board, plus a salary that should allow you to save a substantial amount if you're careful." He named a figure that made Elena nearly choke on her soup. It was more than she had made at both her previous jobs combined. "That's very generous," she managed. "I prefer my employees to be comfortable. Comfortable employees are loyal employees." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "There are, however, some unusual aspects to the position that you should know about." Elena set down her spoon, suddenly wary. "What kind of unusual aspects?" "I keep unconventional hours. I'm rarely awake before sunset, and I prefer not to be disturbed during daylight hours. You would have considerable autonomy in your work, but I would expect regular reports on your progress." "You work nights?" Elena asked. "You could say that." Adrian's smile was enigmatic. "I have business interests that require me to travel frequently, often for weeks at a time. During those periods, you would be responsible for maintaining the property entirely on your own." Elena considered this. It sounded almost too good to be true. A well-paying job with minimal supervision. "What's the catch?" Adrian raised an eyebrow. "The catch? Nobody pays that well for simple groundskeeping unless there's something difficult or dangerous about it." "So what's the catch?" Adrian was quiet for so long that Elena began to worry she had offended him. Finally, he spoke. "The people in town believe this place is cursed. They think I'm some kind of monster. If you work here, they'll treat you with suspicion at best, outright hostility at worst. You'll be isolated, cut off from normal social connections. Some people might even think you're dangerous by association." Elena almost laughed. "Sir, I've been sleeping in doorways and digging through garbage cans for food. I'm already cut off from normal social connections. And if you're offering me a chance to eat regularly and sleep in a real bed, I don't care if the whole town thinks you're the devil himself." Something flickered in Adrian's golden eyes. Surprise, amusement, or perhaps something deeper. "Very well. The job is yours, if you want it. Thomas can show you to your quarters tonight, and we'll discuss the specific duties tomorrow evening." Elena set down her empty bowl. "Thank you. I won't disappoint you. I'm sure you won't." Adrian stood and moved to a desk in the corner of the room. He pulled out a ring of keys and handed them to Elena. "These will give you access to the main house, the greenhouse, the tool shed, and your quarters. Your room is in the east wing, 3rd floor. Thomas will show you the way." As Elena stood to leave, something on Adrian's desk caught her eye. It was just a glimpse, a flash of color among the dark leather and brass accessories, but it stopped her cold. There, partially hidden beneath some papers, was the corner of a photograph. She could only see a small portion of it, but what she saw made her blood freeze. It was a woman's hand, wearing a distinctive silver ring with a turquoise stone. Elena knew that ring. She had seen it every day for 11 years until her grandmother had been buried wearing it. But that was impossible. The woman in the photograph couldn't be her grandmother. This mansion, this wealthy man, this whole world was completely removed from the humble life Elena and her grandmother had lived. "Is something wrong?" Adrian's voice seemed to come from very far away. Elena blinked and realized she had been staring at the desk for several seconds. "No, nothing. I'm just tired." But as Thomas led her through the winding corridors to her new room, Elena's mind raced. She had to be mistaken. It had to be coincidence. Rings like that couldn't be completely unique, could they? Her quarters turned out to be larger and more luxurious than anywhere Elena had ever lived. The bedroom alone was bigger than her grandmother's entire apartment had been. It had its own bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a sitting area with comfortable chairs, and windows that looked out over the mansion's extensive gardens. Thomas provided her with towels, toiletries, and a selection of clothes that would fit her until she could purchase her own. He explained the house rules, which were surprisingly few, and told her that meals would be provided at regular intervals. After Thomas left, Elena sat on the edge of the enormous 4-poster bed and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning she had been homeless and starving. Now she had a job, a roof over her head, and more luxury than she had ever imagined. But she couldn't shake the image of that ring from her mind. Elena waited until she was sure the household had settled for the night. Then she crept back downstairs. The mansion was eerily quiet, her footsteps muffled by thick carpets. She made her way back to the study, her heart pounding. The room was dark except for the dying embers in the fireplace. Elena used the small flashlight from her keychain to navigate to Adrian's desk. Her hands shook as she moved the papers aside to reveal the photograph beneath. What she saw made her gasp so loudly she was sure the whole house would hear her. It wasn't just the ring. The photograph showed her grandmother, definitely her grandmother, Isabel Martinez, but she looked young, maybe in her early 20s. She was standing in front of this very mansion, smiling at the camera. She wore an elegant dress that Elena had never seen before, and her hair was styled in a way that looked expensive and professional. But how was that possible? Elena's grandmother had been a seamstress who lived paycheck to paycheck. She had never mentioned knowing any wealthy people or visiting any mansions. She had always claimed that Elena was her only family, that they only had each other in the world. Elena turned the photograph over with trembling fingers. In faded ink, someone had written, "Isabel, 1987. 1987. Elena's grandmother would have been 23 years old. Elena's mother wouldn't be born for another year. Elena heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly put the photograph back where she had found it. She managed to slip out of the study and make it halfway up the stairs before she encountered Adrian coming down. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. His clothes were different now, more casual, though still expensive. He moved with a fluid grace that Elena found both fascinating and slightly unnerving. "I was getting some water from the kitchen," Elena lied. The kitchen is in the opposite direction from where you came, Adrian observed mildly. Elena felt her cheeks burn. I got lost. This place is bigger than anywhere I've ever lived. Adrian studied her face for a moment, and Elena was sure he could see right through her lie. But all he said was, "It takes some getting used to." "Sleep well, Elena. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Elena nodded and continued up to her room, feeling his golden eyes watching her until she disappeared around the corner. Once safely behind her closed door, Elena's mind raced. The photograph proved that her grandmother had some connection to this place, to Adrian Castellanos. But what kind of connection, and why had her grandmother never mentioned it? Elena thought about her grandmother's final weeks, when the cancer had made her delirious and confused. She had said strange things sometimes, talked about people Elena had never heard of, mentioned places that didn't make sense. Elena had assumed it was just the medication and the illness affecting her mind. Now she wondered if those confused ramblings had actually been memories. Elena spent the rest of the night staring out her window at the moonlit gardens, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to have half its pieces missing. By dawn, she had made a decision. She was going to find out the truth about her grandmother's connection to this place. She was going to discover why Adrian Castellanos had a photograph of Isabel Martinez from nearly 40 years ago. And she was going to learn what other secrets this mansion was hiding. As the sun rose over Blackwood Heights, Elena finally fell into an uneasy sleep, clutching the keys to her new life and to the mystery that might explain everything about her past. Outside her window, the mansion's shadows grew longer, and somewhere in the depths of the old house, secrets that had been buried for decades began to stir. Elena woke to the sound of rain against her windows and the smell of fresh coffee drifting up from somewhere in the mansion. For a moment, she forgot where she was and panicked at the unfamiliar luxury surrounding her. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, the job offer, the photograph, the questions that had kept her awake until dawn. She checked the antique clock on her nightstand. It was nearly noon. Thomas had mentioned that lunch would be available whenever she woke up, and Adrian preferred not to be disturbed until after sunset. That gave Elena several hours to explore and hopefully find some answers. After showering and dressing in the clothes Thomas had provided, they fit surprisingly well. Elena made her way down to the kitchen. She found Thomas preparing what looked like enough food for 6 people. "Good morning, Miss Elena," he said warmly. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you." Elena accepted a cup of coffee and sat at the large wooden table in the center of the kitchen. "Thomas, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How long have you worked for Mr. Castellanos?" Thomas paused in his chopping of vegetables. "Oh, quite a long time. Nearly 30 years now." 30 years? Elena tried to keep her voice casual. "So you would have been here in the late 1980s? "Yes, indeed. I started working here when I was much younger man." Thomas smiled at the memory. "Master Adrian was just getting established then. The house was in terrible condition. Hadn't been properly maintained for years." Elena's pulse quickened. "Were there many visitors back then? Other employees?" Thomas glanced at her curiously. "Not many, no. Master Adrian has always been quite private. There was a young woman who worked here briefly in 1987, I believe. A lovely girl, very kind, but she only stayed for a few months." Elena's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "Do you remember her name? Isabel, I think it was. Isabel Martinez." Thomas's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, you remind me of her quite a bit. Same dark hair, same determined spirit." Elena felt the room spinning slightly. What happened to her? Why did she leave? Thomas's face clouded over. "I'm not entirely sure. There was some sort of emergency with her family. She left very suddenly one night. Master Adrian was quite upset about it." Before Elena could ask more questions, Thomas handed her a plate of sandwiches and fruit. "But enough about ancient history. You should eat something substantial before you begin your duties. Master Adrian has left you a list of tasks in the greenhouse." Elena forced herself to eat, though her mind was reeling. Her grandmother had worked here. Her grandmother had known Adrian Castellanos 30 years ago. But Adrian looked exactly the same age now as he had last night, maybe 35 at most. If he had been an adult in 1987, he would be at least 65 now, unless the stories about this place were true. Unless Adrian Castellanos really was something more than human. Elena pushed that thought away. There had to be a rational explanation. After lunch, she made her way to the greenhouse. It was a beautiful Victorian structure made of wrought iron and glass, filled with exotic plants Elena had never seen before. Some of them seemed to be flowering despite the October chill outside. The task list was written in elegant handwriting on expensive paper. Most of the jobs were straightforward: watering, pruning, checking for pests. But at the bottom of the list was a note that made Elena's blood run cold. Please avoid the locked room in the greenhouse basement. The key you've been given does not open that door, and it should remain that way for your own safety, AC. Elena spent the afternoon working in the greenhouse, but her attention kept drifting to a narrow wooden door partially hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. The basement door. The locked room she wasn't supposed to enter. As evening approached, Aylin heard movement in the main house. Adrian was waking up. She finished her work and made her way back to the mansion, her mind churning with questions. She found Adrian in the study, sitting behind his desk reading what appeared to be financial reports. He looked up as she entered, and Elena was struck again by how young he looked. His skin was flawless, his hair perfectly styled, his eyes bright and alert. If he was really old enough to have known her grandmother as an adult, he was aging remarkably well. "Good evening, Elena. How was your first day?" "Fine, thank you." "I finished everything on the list." Elena hesitated, then decided to be direct. "I had an interesting conversation with Thomas today." Adrian's hand stilled on the papers. "Oh?" "He mentioned that you had another employee named Isabel Martinez who worked here in 1987. The silence that followed was so complete, Elena could hear her own heartbeat. Adrian carefully set down the papers and leaned back in his chair, his golden eyes fixed on her face. "Thomas has a very good memory," he said finally. "She was my grandmother." Adrian didn't look surprised. He looked sad, which was somehow worse. "I thought she might be," he said quietly. "The resemblance is quite strong." Elena felt anger building in her chest. "You knew who I was when I came to your door last night. You knew, and you didn't say anything. What should I have said?" "That I recognized you as the granddaughter of a woman who left my employ 30 years ago? Would that have changed anything?"
"It might have explained why you were so quick to give me this job." Elena crossed her arms.
"High-paying positions don't usually go to strangers who show up in the rain with no references." Adrian stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening gardens. "Your grandmother was special. She was kind, intelligent, and brave. When I saw those same qualities in you, I thought perhaps—" He trailed off. "Perhaps what? Perhaps it was fate bringing her family back to me." Elena stared at his back. "Back to you? What does that mean?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was so low Elena had to strain to hear him. "There are things about this place, about me, that would be difficult for you to understand. Your grandmother discovered some of these things during her time here." "What kinds of things?" Adrian turned to face her, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her take a step backward. It wasn't anger or threat, it was infinite, bone-deep weariness. "Tell me, Elena, what do you know about your family history?" "About your grandfather?" Elena frowned. "I don't know anything about him. Grandmother never talked about him. She said he died before my mother was born." "That's not entirely accurate." Elena's anger flared again. "How would you know? You didn't know my grandmother that well. She only worked here for a few months." "She worked here for 3 months and 17 days, Adrian said precisely, "and in that time she became the most important person in my world." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" Adrian moved closer, and Elena noticed that despite the warm fire in the room, she couldn't feel any body heat from him. "I'm saying that your grandmother and I fell in love. I'm saying that when she left here, she was carrying my child." Elena's legs gave out and she sank into the nearest chair. That's impossible. Your mother's real name was Adriana Martinez. Your grandmother named her after me. My mother's name was Anna Martinez. Anna was a nickname for Adriana. Your grandmother told me in her letters. Elena's head was spinning. Letters? What letters? Adrian moved to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. He withdrew a small wooden box and brought it to Elena. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to my dearest Adrian in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. She wrote to me for 30 years, Adrian said softly. She told me about raising my daughter, about Anna's marriage to your father, about your birth. She sent me pictures of you growing up. Elena picked up one of the letters with shaking hands. It was dated just 2 years ago, shortly before her grandmother's cancer diagnosis. My darling Adrian, it began. Elena has just graduated high school. She's so beautiful and she has your eyes. I know you can't be part of her life. We agreed that was too dangerous, but I wanted you to know that your granddaughter is becoming a remarkable young woman. Elena dropped the letter as if it burned her. This is insane. You're telling me that you're my grandfather? That you had a relationship with my grandmother 30 years ago? You look younger than I am. Adrian returned to his chair, moving with that same fluid grace she had noticed before. How much do you know about the folklore surrounding this mansion, Elena? I told you I don't believe in ghost stories. What if the people in town are right to be afraid of this place? Elena stood up abruptly. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not interested in participating. If you think you can convince me that you're some kind of immortal creature who fathered my mother, you're mistaken. Look at me, Elena. Really look at me. Against her better judgment, Elena found herself studying Adrian's face. His skin was completely smooth, without a single line or blemish. His hair showed no trace of gray. His eyes held a depth that seemed far older than his apparent age. People have lived in this mansion for over 200 years, Adrian said, but the ownership records show the same name for all that time. Adrian Castellanos.
The townspeople think it's a family name passed down through generations.
They're wrong. Elena shook her head. This is crazy. People don't live for 200 years. Vampires do. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elena wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as an elaborate joke or the delusion of a wealthy eccentric. But something in Adrian's eyes stopped her. Vampires aren't real, she whispered. I've been hiding what I am for longer than your country has existed, Adrian said. I've watched empires rise and fall. I've seen technology transform the world in ways I could never have imagined. And in all that time, I've never felt truly alive until I met your grandmother. You're insane. Isabel discovered the truth about me 6 weeks after she came to work here. She was exploring the mansion's lower levels, much as you've been thinking about exploring them. And she found evidence of what I really am. Elena froze. How did you know I was thinking about exploring? Adrian's smile was sad. Because you're Isabel's granddaughter. Curiosity and courage run in your bloodline. What did she find? The truth about the locked room in the greenhouse basement. The truth about why I only appear after sunset. The truth about why I've remained unchanged while decades pass around me. Elena felt herself being drawn back into the conversation despite her fear. What truth? Adrian stood and moved to another cabinet. This time he withdrew a small, ornate key. Would you like to see for yourself? Every rational part of Elena's mind screamed at her to refuse, to run back to her room and pack her few belongings, to leave this madness behind. But the resemblance between her and her grandmother wasn't just physical. They shared the same relentless need to understand, to uncover hidden truths. Show me, she whispered. Adrian nodded and led her out of the study. They walked through the mansion's corridors, past oil paintings of stern-faced people who all seemed to be watching their progress, out through French doors into the garden where the October night was cold and clear, across the manicured lawns to the greenhouse. Inside, the exotic plants seemed different in the darkness. Some of them glowed with an almost phosphorescent light, while others seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Adrian led her to the vine-covered door and inserted the ornate key. "Before we go down there," he said, "I want you to know that whatever you see, whatever you learn, you're safe with me. I would never harm you. I loved your grandmother, and I love you as the granddaughter I never thought I'd have the chance to know." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Adrian opened the door to reveal a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. He took a lantern from a hook beside the door and lit it with a match. The warm light flickered against the stone walls as they descended. The basement was larger than Elena had expected. It stretched under most of the greenhouse with stone archways dividing it into several chambers, but it was the contents of those chambers that made Elena gasp. Ancient books filled shelves along the walls, their leather bindings worn smooth by centuries of handling. Maps and charts covered a large table in the center of the room, showing parts of the world Elena didn't recognize. Strange instruments and artifacts were displayed in glass cases. And everywhere, there were photographs and paintings spanning what looked like centuries. Elena recognized the mansion in many of them, but the clothing and technology in the images showed the passage of decades. In every single image was the same man, Adrian Castellanos, looking exactly as he did now. "My God," Elena whispered. "I've kept records," Adrian explained, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "Documentation of my existence, proof of the passing years." Elena moved closer to examine the photographs. There was Adrian in what looked like the 1920s standing beside an old automobile. Adrian in military uniform from what might have been the Civil War. Adrian in formal Victorian dress standing in front of the mansion when it was clearly newly built. How is this possible? "I was turned in 1823, Adrian said simply. "I was 28 years old when I became what I am now. I've remained 28 ever since." Elena turned to face him. "Turned by whom?" "A vampire much older than myself. She said she saw potential in me, something worth preserving. I sometimes wonder if she simply wanted to condemn me to eternal loneliness." "Until you met my grandmother." "Until I met your grandmother," Adrian's expression grew tender. "Isabel accepted what I was. She wasn't afraid of me. For the first time in over a century, I felt like I might be able to have something approaching a normal relationship." Elena picked up one of the photographs. It showed Adrian and her grandmother standing together in this very basement, both of them smiling. Her grandmother looked radiant, happy in a way Ayla had never seen her. "What happened? Why did she leave?" Adrian's face darkened. "Because loving a vampire puts mortal humans in danger. There are others of my kind who don't appreciate those who form attachments to humans. They see it as a weakness that threatens our secrecy." "Others found out about your relationship?" "A vampire named Marcus Thorne had been watching me for years, disapproving of my attempts to live peacefully among humans. When he learned about Isabel, he threatened her life." Elena felt ice forming in her veins. "Threatened her how?" "He said he would kill her and any children she might bear unless I sent her away and never contacted her again. I couldn't risk her safety or the life of our unborn child. So you made her leave. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I thought she would be safer away from me." Elena looked around the basement chamber, taking in the evidence of Adrian's long, solitary existence. "Were you right? Was she safer?" Adrian's expression grew pained. "I thought so. For 30 years I believed I had made the right choice. But when I learned she was dying, when I realized I would never see her again, you could have gone to her. You could have been there. Marcus is still alive, Elena, still watching me. If I had gone to your grandmother, he might have discovered she had been in contact with me all these years. Her letters, your existence, it would have put both of you in danger." Elena set down the photograph with trembling hands. "And now I'm here. And now you're here," Adrian confirmed, "which means Marcus will eventually learn about you, if he hasn't already." Elena felt the weight of revelation crushing down on her. In the space of an hour, she had learned that vampires were real, that her mysterious grandfather was one of them, and that her very existence might put her in mortal danger. "What do we do?" she asked. Adrian moved closer. his golden eyes intense in the lantern light. "We have a choice to make. I can send you away tonight, give you enough money to start a new life far from here, where Marcus will never find you. You'll be safe, but you'll have to leave everything behind and never return. Or you stay, and I teach you what you need to know to survive in my world. I teach you about vampire society, about the rules that govern our kind, about how to protect yourself from those who would harm you." Elena thought about her grandmother's letters, about the love that had been strong enough to last 30 years of separation. She thought about the photograph of her grandmother smiling in this very room, unafraid of the truth about the man she loved. "If I stay, will Marcus come after me? Probably. But if you stay, you won't face him alone." Elena looked around the chamber one more time, at the evidence of centuries of existence, at the proof that the world was far more mysterious and dangerous than she had ever imagined. "I'm not running," she said firmly. "I've spent my whole life wondering about my family's secrets. I'm not walking away now that I finally have answers." Adrian smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely happy. "You truly are Isabel's granddaughter." As they made their way back upstairs, Elena's mind raced with new questions. She had found the truth about her grandfather, but that truth had opened doors to mysteries she could never have imagined. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Blackwood Heights, an ancient vampire named Marcus Thorne was about to discover that Adrian Castellanos' human bloodline had survived. The real danger was just beginning. The following weeks passed in a blur of revelation and training that pushed Elena to the limits of what she thought possible. Adrian proved to be a patient but demanding teacher, educating her about vampire society, supernatural politics, and the delicate balance that kept his kind hidden from the human world. Elena learned that vampires lived by ancient laws enforced by a council of elders who had ruled their kind for centuries. She learned about blood bonds, territorial disputes, and the complex web of alliances and enemies that stretched across the globe. Most importantly, she learned about Marcus Thorne, the vindictive vampire who had torn her family apart and who would soon discover her existence. "Marcus isn't just old," Adrian explained during one of their evening lessons in the basement chamber. "He's cunning, patient, and absolutely ruthless when he perceives a threat to vampire secrecy. He believes that emotional attachments make us vulnerable, and he spent centuries eliminating vampires who form bonds with humans." Elena practiced defensive techniques using weapons that seemed more suited to a museum than modern combat. Silver blades, wooden stakes, and small crossbows designed specifically for vampire hunting. Adrian also taught her to recognize the signs of vampire presence and how to move through the supernatural world without drawing unwanted attention. "The irony," Adrian said as Elena practiced her aim with a crossbow, "is that Marcus's obsession with eliminating human-vampire relationships has made him exactly the kind of monster humans would fear if they knew we existed." Thomas burst into the study during one of their training sessions. His usually calm demeanor was shattered, his face pale with panic. "Master Adrian," he gasped, "there are vehicles approaching the mansion, black cars with tinted windows. I've never seen them before." Adrian was on his feet instantly, his body tense with anticipation. "How many cars?" "3. Moving slowly up the drive." Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. "Is it him?" Adrian nodded grimly. "Marcus has found us." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of preparation. Adrian armed himself with weapons Elena hadn't known he possessed, ancient swords that gleamed with silver inlay, a crossbow that looked both medieval and deadly efficient. He handed Elena a smaller crossbow and a silver dagger. "Remember what I taught you," he said, his golden eyes intense. "Marcus will try to use words as weapons first. He'll attempt to manipulate you to make you doubt everything I've told you. Don't listen to him." They heard car doors slamming outside, followed by footsteps on the gravel drive. Adrian positioned himself between Elena and the study's entrance. Every muscle in his body coiled for action. The front door opened without anyone knocking. A clear show of power and disrespect. Footsteps echoed through the mansion's hallways, unhurried and confident. Then Marcus Thorne entered the study. Elena's first thought was that he looked nothing like what she had expected. Instead of the monster she had imagined, Marcus appeared to be an elegant man in his apparent 40s, with silver-gray hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore an expensive dark suit and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. But there was something wrong with his smile. It was too wide, too sharp, and it never reached his cold eyes. "Adrian, my old friend," Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous. "How wonderful to see you again after all these years." Two other vampires flanked Marcus, a tall woman with platinum blonde hair and a stocky man whose muscles strained against his suit jacket. Both watched Elena with predatory interest that made her skin crawl. "Marcus," Adrian replied coldly, "you're not welcome here." "Oh, but I think I am." Marcus's gaze moved to Elena, and she felt examined like a specimen under a microscope. "Especially since you seem to have acquired something that belongs to our world." "Elena belongs to no one," Adrian said, his voice carrying a warning that made the other vampires shift slightly. "Elena," Marcus repeated, savoring the name. "Such a lovely name for Isabel's granddaughter." "Yes, I know all about dear Isabel. I know about the letters she sent you, about the photographs you've kept, about this touching reunion you've arranged." Elena found her voice. "You're the one who threatened my grandmother." Marcus turned his full attention to her, and Elena understood for the first time what Adrian meant about vampires being apex predators. Everything about Marcus radiated danger. His too-still posture, his unblinking stare, the way he seemed to taste the air around him. "I did what was necessary to maintain order," Marcus said. "Your grandmother understood the wisdom of my decision. She accepted that some sacrifices must be made for the greater good." "She was terrified of you," Elena shot back. "She spent 30 years looking over her shoulder, afraid you might change your mind and come after her family." Marcus laughed, and the sound sent chills down Elena's spine. "Terrified? Oh, my dear girl, you have no idea how wrong you are." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope. "Would you like to see the real reason your grandmother left this mansion? Would you like to know what she discovered that made her flee in the middle of the night?" Adrian took a step forward. "Don't, Marcus. Leave her out of this. But she's already in this, isn't she? The moment she walked through your door, she became part of our world." Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of old photographs. "These were taken by one of my associates in 1987. I think you'll find them illuminating." Elena's hands shook as she took the photographs. The first few showed her grandmother and Adrian together in various parts of the mansion, looking happy and in love. But the later images made Elena's blood run cold. They showed Adrian feeding, drinking blood from human victims who lay still and pale in his arms. "No," Elena whispered, "your grandfather isn't the reformed vampire he's pretended to be," Marcus said, his voice gentle and persuasive. "He's a killer, Elena. He's always been a killer." "Your grandmother discovered his true nature and ran for her life." Elena looked at Adrian, searching his face for denial, for some explanation that would make sense of what she was seeing. But Adrian's expression was stricken, guilty. "It's not what you think," he said desperately. "Isn't it?" Marcus moved closer to Elena. "Look at the dates on those photographs, my dear. They were taken just days before your grandmother left. She discovered what Adrian really was, what he had been doing while she thought he was different from other vampires." Elena stared at the photographs, her mind reeling. The victims in the images were clearly dead, drained completely of blood, and Adrian looked satisfied, almost euphoric in the aftermath. "You killed them," she whispered. "Elena, let me explain," Adrian pleaded. "Those people were already dying. Terminal cancer patients, people in comas with no hope of recovery. I was ending their suffering and making use of what would otherwise be wasted." "You were feeding on dying humans?" Elena's voice rose with horror. Marcus stepped between them. "You see, even his explanations reveal his monstrous nature. He preys on the vulnerable, the helpless. He's a predator who has convinced himself that his actions are merciful." Elena backed away from both vampires, her crossbow raised but forgotten in her shock. "My grandmother found out about this. That's why she left." "Indeed she did," Marcus confirmed. And when she threatened to expose him to the human authorities, Adrian realized he needed a more permanent solution to his problem. "What do you mean?" Ana demanded. Marcus smiled that terrible smile again. "He didn't let your grandmother leave, my dear. He killed her." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "That's impossible. She died of cancer 2 years ago. Did she? Or did Adrian simply make it appear that way?" Marcus produced another photograph, this one showing Adrian standing over a hospital bed. "Your grandfather has contacts in the medical community who help him acquire blood and dispose of evidence. Inducing cancer symptoms in a healthy human is child's play for someone with his resources." Elena's world tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew, everything she had believed about her grandmother's death, suddenly seemed uncertain. "He's lying," Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Marcus moved closer to Elena. "Think about it, my dear. Your grandmother was in perfect health until she suddenly wasn't. The cancer appeared rapidly and aggressively. The doctor said they had never seen anything like it." Elena remembered the confusion of those final months, how quickly her grandmother had deteriorated, how the medical team had been baffled by the unusual progression of her illness. "You're saying Adrian gave her cancer. I'm saying your grandfather decided that if he couldn't have Isabel, no one could. He waited 30 years for the perfect opportunity, then struck when you were old enough to be on your own." Elena raised the crossbow, pointing it at Adrian. "Is it true? Did you kill my grandmother?" Adrian's golden eyes filled with anguish. "Elena, you have to understand. Did you kill her?" Elena's voice broke on the words. Adrian closed his eyes. Yes. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena felt everything inside her crumble. Her trust, her love, her hope for finally having a family. But not for the reasons Marcus claims. Adrian continued. "Your grandmother was dying, Elena. Real cancer, not induced. She had maybe 2 months left and they would have been months of agony. She asked me to end her suffering." "Lies," Marcus said softly. "He's still lying to you." Elena's hands shook as she held the crossbow. "Prove it. Both of you. Prove your version is true." Marcus reached into his jacket again and withdrew a small recording device. "Your grandmother left a message before she died. Would you like to hear her final words?" Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Marcus pressed play, and Elena's grandmother's weak but unmistakable voice filled the room. "If anyone finds this recording, know that I am about to die at the hands of the vampire Adrian Castellanos. He has convinced me it's an act of mercy, but I know the truth. He can't bear the thought of losing me again, so he's going to make sure no one else can have me either. Elena, my darling granddaughter, if you ever meet him, run. Run as far and as fast as you can. He is not the man I once loved. He is a monster, and he will destroy you just as he has destroyed me." Ellen dropped the crossbow, her whole body shaking. The voice was definitely her grandmother's, recorded shortly before her death. There was no doubt about its authenticity. "I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way," Marcus said gently, "but you needed to know what kind of creature you were living with." Elena looked at Adrian, seeing him clearly for the first time. The perfect features that never aged, the golden eyes that held secrets spanning centuries. The smooth way he moved, like a predator always ready to strike. "Get away from me," she whispered. "Elena, please." Adrian stepped toward her and she scrambled backward. "Stay away from me." Marcus moved protectively in front of Elena. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, my dear. I'm here to take you somewhere safe." "Safe?" Elena laughed bitterly. "Safe from vampires? You're all monsters." "Not all of us," Marcus said. "Some of us choose to live by the old codes, to maintain order without forming destructive attachments. I can teach you to survive in our world without becoming a victim." Elena looked between the two vampires, Adrian, whose love for her grandmother had apparently twisted into murderous obsession, and Marcus, who offered protection but had terrorized her family for 30 years. "What if I don't want to live in your world? What if I just want to leave?" Marcus's expression grew sad. "I'm afraid that's no longer an option. You know too much about our kind to simply walk away. The Council requires that humans with our secrets be either eliminated or brought under our protection. Elena realized she was trapped. There was no running from this world now that she had been exposed to it. Her only choice was which vampire to trust with her life. She thought about her grandmother's recording, but something about it bothered her. The voice was right, the words were convincing, but when was this recording made? She asked Marcus. The night before your grandmother died. Elena frowned, but she was in a coma for the last week of her life. The doctors said she couldn't speak or even recognize visitors. Marcus's confident expression flickered for just a moment. The recording was made earlier than that. Your grandmother anticipated what Adrian would do. Then why didn't she call for help? Why didn't she contact the police or try to escape? She was too weak by then. The cancer had progressed too far. Elena's mind raced. Something didn't add up about Marcus's story. If her grandmother had been strong enough to make such a coherent recording, she would have been strong enough to call for help or try to get away, unless the recording wasn't what Marcus claimed it was. You're lying, Elena said suddenly. That recording is fake. Marcus's mask of kindness slipped, revealing the predator beneath. I assure you, it's quite real. No, it's not. My grandmother would never call me darling granddaughter. She always called me Mija. It was our special thing. And she would never pronounce Adrian's name the way she did in that recording. She always said it with a slight Spanish accent. Marcus's blue eyes turned cold. You're being foolish, child. Elena backed away from him. You doctored that recording. You probably had decades to plan it, to prepare fake evidence against Adrian. Why would I do such a thing? Elena looked at Adrian, who was watching her with a mixture of hope and pride. Because you couldn't stand that he found happiness with a human. Because you're exactly the kind of monster who would break up a family and then spend 30 years planning revenge. Marcus's elegant facade cracked completely. Stupid girl. You have no idea what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. Elena picked up her crossbow and pointed it at Marcus. I'm choosing to trust the vampire who loved my grandmother enough to let her go rather than put her in danger. I'm choosing to believe in the vampire who collected my grandmother's letters and kept her photograph and grieved for 30 years because he lost her. Marcus hissed, revealing fangs that gleamed white in the lamplight. You'll regret this decision. Maybe, Elena said, but at least it's my decision to make. The confrontation that followed was swift and violent. Marcus and his companions attacked with centuries of experience behind them, but Adrian fought with the desperation of someone protecting his only remaining connection to the woman he had loved. Elena found herself in the middle of a supernatural battle unlike anything she could have imagined. Furniture crashed as the vampires moved with inhuman speed. Paintings were shredded by claws that could tear through steel. The ancient crossbow in Elena's hands felt pitifully inadequate against creatures who could heal from almost any wound. But Adrian had trained her well. When one of Marcus's companions lunged at her, Elena was ready. Her silver-tipped bolt caught the vampire's center mass, and he crumpled with a shriek of pain. The distraction was all Adrian needed. He drove his silver sword through Marcus's chest, pinning the ancient vampire to the wall. It's over, Marcus, Adrian said, breathing heavily. Your obsession with purity and control ends here. Marcus laughed weakly. You think killing me will solve anything? The council knows about the girl. They'll send others. Let them come, Elena said, surprising herself with her calm tone. I'm done running for my family's legacy. Marcus's eyes widened in shock. You're staying with him? Even knowing what he is? Elena looked at Adrian, wounded, exhausted, but still standing protectively between her and danger. He's my grandfather. He loved my grandmother. And right now, he's the only family I have left. You're making a mistake, Marcus gasped. Maybe, Elena said, echoing her earlier words. But like I said, it's my mistake to make. Marcus's eyes rolled back and his body went still. The silver had done its work. In the silence that followed, Elena and Adrian stood surrounded by the wreckage of the study, both of them processing what had just happened. So, Elena said finally, what happens now? Adrian pulled his sword free and began cleaning the silver blade. Now we rebuild, we establish new defenses, we prepare for whatever the council sends next. And we do it together?" Adrian smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him. "If you're willing to stay with a monster." Elena thought about everything she had learned, everything she had lost and gained. Her old life was gone forever, but in its place was something she had never dared hope for. A family that understood her, secrets that connected her to a larger world, and a purpose that went beyond simple survival. "I've been called worse things than a monster's granddaughter," she said. As dawn approached, they worked together to dispose of the bodies and begin repairing the damage to the mansion. Thomas appeared with his usual efficiency, asking no questions and offering practical help. Elena realized that this was her life now, defending a hidden world, protecting ancient secrets, and standing beside a vampire who had loved her grandmother enough to sacrifice his own happiness for her safety. It wasn't the life she had planned, but as she watched Adrian carefully restore one of the damaged paintings, she realized it was exactly the life her grandmother would have wanted for her. A life where she belonged. A life where she was part of something larger than herself. A life where the mysteries of her family finally made sense. Outside, the sun rose over Blackwood Heights, and Elena Martinez, granddaughter of a seamstress and a vampire, began her new existence as a guardian of supernatural secrets and ancient love stories that refused to die. The destitute girl who had knocked on a mansion door in desperation was gone forever. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had found her family's truth and chosen to embrace it, no matter how dangerous or impossible it might be. Elena had finally come home. Destitute girl confronts the vampire lord. "Why does your mansion hold my mom's photograph?" The truth that followed shocked everyone.